Wake up, wake up. Good morning, freedom fighters. It's Sunday. It's the dark side of education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. We got another good show today. It's cold up here in Minnesota, so I got my hoodie on today, my jacket on. The weather up here seems to go up and go down. I think we were in the 80s last week. Might have got down to about 30 something last night. Unfortunately, our education system seems to be going down, has been going down. And today, we've got some wonderful guests with us, very esteemed guests. President Neel Kashkari from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, and also Minnesota's own retired Justice Alan Page will be joining us. We appreciate y'all getting up this morning. Hope you got your coffee. You know I got mine. A lot of things happening here in Minnesota. Good morning, Amber. Lots of things going on here with education in Minnesota. It's been a big week. I know some of y'all have been pushing me to talk about the St. Paul Federation of Educators union meeting, where a Black woman was asked to take off her earrings in the middle of a Zoom. Some other stuff going on with Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, but we'll get to that next week. Today, it's all about the Page Amendment, the right to a quality education. And again, like I said, we got President Neel Kashkari here with us, Justice Alan Page here. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate y'all being here with us today. I see y'all, Justice Page, you got a fleece on, so you might look like you're a little chilly like I am.
Trying to stay warm.
Yes, sir. Yes,
33 this morning.
Hey, I couldn't tee off this morning at 7 like I wanted to. Frost advisory.
I was out there.
Or you? Yes. President Kashkari, how you feeling this morning?
I'm feeling great, Rashad. Please call me Neel.
Neel, you know it. You know it. I got to show off for the audience, right? I get to call y'all Neel and Alan, but we got to make sure our audience knows what's really popping. So President Kashkari, I'm gonna call you for just a couple more times.
Okay.
And retired Justice Page. Folks have been asking me, what's this Page Amendment all about, Rashad? Why is there all of this hype around the Page Amendment? And I told them, you know, they can hear me talk about it. They listen to me run my mouth a lot. But I thought it'd be great to have y'all come on, really dive into the Page Amendment, how we got there. But before we dive into the Page Amendment, I think you two gentlemen are awesome. So if both of you could just give us just a short introduction, who you are, how you got to this space, I'd appreciate it. Let's start with you, President Kashkari.
Thank you, Rashad. My name is Neel Kashkari. I'm president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. I started that position on January 1st, 2016, so almost 5 years. I was born and raised in Ohio. My parents were immigrants from India. I started out as an aerospace engineer, then went back to school, went into banking and finance, served in both the Bush and Obama administrations in the U.S. Treasury Department, and then did some other things, but then found my way to Minnesota, and really happy to be here.
I appreciate you. Retired Justice Page.
Yes, good morning. Alan Page, as Rashad notes, retired justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, co-founder along with my wife Diane of the Page Education Foundation, a foundation that has its goal encouraging, motivating, and assisting young men and women of color in the pursuit of education beyond high school. We do that two ways: one, by providing financial assistance, but two, having our grant recipients, we call them paid scholars,
Yes,
serve young children as tutors, mentors, and role models, so that those young children can see education being used as a tool by somebody who looks like them, somebody from their neighborhood, somebody who has some shared experience. How did I get here? I too, born and raised in Ohio. Along the way, ended up playing football, but at the same time, always having in the back of my mind a message that my parents drilled into me, that education was important, and that if I was going to have a better life than they had, I had to be educated. And it seems to me that having had the good fortune I've had, it seems to me that I have some obligation to try to help others achieve whatever their full potential may be. And education is a critical tool for doing that.
All right. That's what's up. That's what's up. I always think it's good to, I think a lot of folks might have seen you all doing the work that you do, see you in the media. But it's sort of bring y'all down to the ground level, let folks know who you are. We got folks tuning in from all over the country, all over the world. So shout out to Sheikah. Am I pronouncing that right? Miss Houston, good morning from South Carolina. A lot of folks might know about the education system here in Minnesota. Some folks might not, right? And what I've said to the audience before is that we have worst in nation education outcomes, education gaps. We have a lack of teachers of color. We have a lot of problems, right? And I try to frame it as the foundation for our education system here in Minnesota, it's not solid, right? And when I think about the efforts that have taken place to close the achievement gap, I'll just say they've fallen short, right? What well-intentioned plans, well-meaning people, but they've fallen short, and our education gaps have continued to widen, right? When you all think about the constitutional amendment, the Page Amendment, how do you look at it when it comes to that foundation, when it comes to, the real purpose of the Page Amendment? Kashkari?
Thank you, Rashad. You gave a great overview. And when I moved to Minnesota, I naively assumed that Minnesota would have smaller gaps because on average, Minnesota is a very successful state. On average, we have high quality schools with good outcomes. On average, we have an educated workforce. On average, we have a vibrant business community. So I thought, okay, everybody must be doing better in Minnesota. Yeah. And so I was surprised when I got here and said, wow, we've got the worst gaps in the country. What's going on? So I asked my researchers to look into it, and they reported what you just described. There have been a lot of attempts, good faith attempts in the last 30 years to try to close gaps, but we've made zero progress, zero. If anything, the gaps are getting bigger. Yeah. When we look around the country, that is not true everywhere. There are states that are making big changes, that are having better outcomes for kids. And so my analysis was, it seemed like politics is getting in the way, that Republicans have one set of solutions, Democrats have another set of solutions. They don't agree. So what they do is they do little minor things in the middle, not really changing things, kind of just more superficial. And everybody says that they are for kids first, but they're not really for kids first because it's their own political considerations getting in the way. Right. So about 2 years ago, I reached out to Justice Page because of his time on the court, and I knew about the Page Education Foundation and his lifetime work on education equity. And I asked him, I said, is there a way that we could literally put children first in the eyes of the law to break through this political logjam? And he said yes. And so we looked at the Minnesota Constitution. The current Minnesota Constitution has an education provision that was written in 1857, when, by the way, slavery was still legal in much of America.
Right.
Many other states have updated.
President Kashkari, let me pause you for a second. Sure. I'm gonna pull this up so folks know exactly what you're talking about. See if we can share this here. So now folks should be able to see, the equal right and then the old language. So go ahead, Kashkari. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's okay. So the language there in the middle of the screen, uniform system of public schools, what it basically reads, what the courts have said, is that today students in Minnesota have the right to access an adequate education system. What is an adequate education system? It's on average adequate. It works great for some kids, wealthy kids. It works very poorly for low-income kids, and not just kids of color, low-income kids all around the state.
Right.
And it's just dumb luck if you or your child end up at the top of that system or the bottom of that system. That's all. The state's responsibility is met. So what Justice Page and I have drafted, and I'll let him walk through it and give the legal rationale behind it, it elevates the standard. It creates a civil right to a quality public education for all children, and then it importantly holds the state accountable for outcomes. We think this can lead to transformation of our education system over time by literally putting children first in the eyes of the law.
Justice Page, I'll let you take it.
You know, the one thing I didn't mention in my introduction, for me, this issue of education is an issue of justice. It's an issue of not only educational justice, but social justice, racial justice, um, justice in all of its various forms are tied inextricably to how we educate our children. With that, let me just point out that if you look at the current language, you'll note that it focuses on the educational system and inputs into that system. And we thought that a change in the Constitution to shift the focus to include children,
Yes.
indeed putting children first. I mean, interestingly, the current language, to say the least, doesn't put children first.
I mean, I don't even see children in there, Justice Page. Am I missing something?
Well, I hadn't gone back to look at it closely, so I was about to say that,
Yes.
but the word children isn't there. And at the end of the day, who are we talking about educating? It
Right.
is our children. And so we thought that by putting children first and making education a civil right, we could create the catalyst for real change. And so we came up with this language: all children have a fundamental right to a quality public education that fully prepares them with the tools necessary for participation in our economy, our democracy, and our society. When we say all children, we mean all children.
Yes, sir.
Whether you're Black or brown, indigenous, white, Asian, wealthy, poor, able-bodied or disabled-bodied, urban or rural,
Yes, sir.
all children deserve a right to a quality public education. And so that is one thing that we're very clear on. The second thing is we're very clear on is what are we talking about when we talk about quality? Well, we're talking about an education that fully prepares children for participation in our economy, our democracy, and our society, as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state. That provision focuses on ensuring that all children are measured by the same standard. It is not the quality standard. It is just a tool to measure quality and to ensure that everybody is being measured alike. Because we could, start measuring different groups of kids on by different criteria and say we solved the problem.
Exactly.
Well, that doesn't solve the problem. Finally, the last sentence: it is the paramount duty of the state to ensure. Let me go back. It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools that fulfill this fundamental right. Two things. Under this provision, the state would have no higher duty in all the things that states do, the state of Minnesota does. It would have no higher duty than to ensure quality public schools. The second piece of that, and equally important, is that those schools will be required by the state to fulfill a child's fundamental right. And when I say the state, the provision incorporates all branches of state government, whether it be the legislative, the executive, or the judiciary. They all have a role in that you know, a right without a remedy is not much of a right. And so this provision, this sentence incorporates the remedy, which is that children and their families could, if necessary, if their fundamental right to a quality public education isn't being met, seek a legal remedy to have that right met.
And thank you, Justice Page. For the audience, right, I want you to think about this for a second, right? Our current Constitution is focused on the system, right? The system that is failing to educate our children, you know, unless we have wealthy white children, right? So the current Constitution is all about the system. The Page Amendment shifts it from the system. School buildings, right? Every school should have a end of the period bell ringing off. That's uniform, right? To shifting it to our children. And there's been some pushback, right? On that last part, in Justice Page, when you talk through it, it's like you are the expert, right? I see you as the expert. Folks around this see you as the expert. But there's this pushback around the last part of what you said, right? Parents have the power, families have the power to where if our children aren't receiving a quality education, we have that remedy through the courts. Some folks seem to be a little scared about that, but what's your response to well that's just going to put everything in the courts?
Well, I have a couple of responses. The first of which is maybe this would be an incentive not to try to continue to defend the indefensible.
Right.
That's number one. People can sit down and come to some solution that will solve the problem, because that's what this is all about. It's not about being able to go to court just because you want to go to court. It's about ensuring educational rights. That's number one. Number two, we see this as the beginning, that children and families will now have power to have input into what the education system looks like, so that we can build a system that works for individual children.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily lead to litigation.
And I mean, thinking about litigation, right, Justice Page, my personal opinion, and I've looked through, you know, done some research around court cases related to education in Minnesota. There have been court cases, and I think of one specifically in St. Paul that led to the Latino consent decree. But when I talk to Latina families in St. Paul, or you look at the data, the academic outcome data in St. Paul, Latina students are not doing any better with that consent decree. So I haven't really seen the courts have the impact that folks try to make it seem like it would have. President Kashkari, what are your thoughts on folks who come with the narrative to say, hey, well, this is just going to end up in the courts? I have some words for them, but what are your thoughts?
Well, we hear this a lot from legislators who say we're afraid, because the current Constitution just gives the power to the legislature for education. The new language is the state. So it's the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, and that's by design. And some legislators say, we don't want the court stepping in and doing our jobs. We want the chance to design the system for the future. And as Alan just said, we think that amending the Constitution is the starting of a process, because then the legislature and the governor will have the opportunity to come together to make the kind of changes that need to be made. And only if they don't act, only if they fail, would then somebody say, well, I need to go to court because they didn't make the right changes or they didn't make enough changes. So it's interesting. We had a senior legislator in the state capitol say to us, well, then if it's on us to make the changes, we don't need this. We can do this without the amendment. And I said, that's great. What have you been doing for the last 30 years? What are you waiting for? So this is a catalyst by putting, this is giving power to families that don't have power today.
Right.
And that makes some people nervous. The people who have power today are saying, I don't know if I want to share my power with somebody else.
And it's interesting because you'll hear from, groups like Education Minnesota that there are about our children, that they want what's best, but then they come out and say, well, this Page Amendment is about privatizing the schools, ending public education. And some of it just, it gets me really frustrated, right? And then you have other groups who talk about, well, we have to end poverty before something like the Page Amendment will make a difference. And Justice Page, you said this is about justice, right? I say all the time, there's no way we're going to end poverty, that there's no way folks are going to have jobs if it doesn't begin with quality education, right?
I'm laughing because it seems to me, Neel is the economist, so I'm not going to try to take over his role here, but it seems to me that at the heart of economic opportunity, at the heart of ending poverty, is preparing people for the jobs that are out there. How do you do that? You do it with education. So if we want to end poverty, I don't know any other way. I mean, that's sort of fundamental. The other piece here is, we're talking about educating individuals and individual children and giving them power. We're also talking about public education. I don't know how anybody can look at this language and think that we're talking about something other than public education, and creating a system that gives every child the opportunity to achieve their highest self, whatever that might be.
Yes.
And the reality is that, there will be A students and there will be students that don't perform that well, but to perform as well as they can.
Yes, sir.
That's what this is about.
And thank you for that, Justice Page. I want to get to a couple of questions from the audience. And I think this one it aligns with what we're talking about right now. But Facebook user, and again, folks who are tuning in from Facebook, if you're tuning in from the Minnesota Parent Union group or one of the group pages, if you want your comment attributed to you, I think you just have to sign up or do something like that. But this Facebook user says, why were legislators, teachers union, and lobbyists for administrators against it?
Well, I would jump in and just say two things. One, it's about power, the fear of losing power. And two, it's about, well, I've lost my second thought.
Well, let me just tap into that power right there, right? Does power for one group of people or one, our children mean that, someone else doesn't have power?
Well, I just got my second thought back. It's about power and adult considerations. That's what it's about.
Yes, sir.
And
knowledge, just like you were saying, Rashad, knowledge is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
If I'm going to educate my children, that doesn't come at the expense of somebody else's child also learning, gaining that same knowledge. Knowledge can be shared widely. Now, political power, it's not true. If we're going to give political power to families that don't have it today, there are those who have political power today who are threatened by that. Yeah. But one thing that's exciting about this amendment is bipartisan. We've united many legislators of color who know that the kids in their communities are directly affected by these disparities, with conservative white Republicans from greater Minnesota whose kids in their districts are also suffering from these poor education outcomes.
Exactly.
Interestingly, on the privatization point, one of our supporters, which we're really proud and pleased to have his support, is Minnesota's own Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who looked at the language and he said, it says public 3 times in 3 sentences. How anybody can think that this leads to privatization, it's just silly.
And it's just sort of the same narrative that we hear from Education Minnesota time after time when it comes to reforming or doing something different with our education system. And for the audience, you have to remember, right? When you have teachers' unions, their responsibility are teachers. Their responsibility contractually is to make sure teachers have what they need. And if you're looking at the data in Minnesota, worst in nation education gaps, you see that barrier that they present has us where we are at. And I want to pull up sort of what Education Minnesota is sort of talking about, right? And I'm not even going to show it on the screen. I'll put it in the comments maybe later. I don't want anybody to waste their time on that, right? Because from what I'm hearing from Justice Page, from what Neel's saying, this is about our children. To see it as a move to privatize. And Justice Page, I don't even know, are you for privatization?
No.
Neel Kashkari, are you trying to use this Page amendment to privatize public schools?
No, and what's interesting is we had private school advocates come to us and say, hey, we love this amendment. If you just drop the word public from it, so that it's any kind of school, public or private, then we'll support you. And we said no. We want to make sure that the public education system works for all children. And if you want to send your child to private school, God bless you. Go for it. Do it. We're not opposed to that. But we want to make sure the public education system is great for all Minnesota children.
And let me just be clear here. You can't get privatization out of the language of our proposal. It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools.
Period.
Period. Full stop. Quality public schools that provide a quality public education. And so you just can't get there from here. If we were interested in going down the privatization road, we would not be using that sentence. Yeah. I can guarantee you that.
And I've heard you say this before, Justice Page, just make sure I have it right. With our current Constitution, as it is written, we could have things like vouchers, right?
If we had a governor and a legislature that wanted to go down that road, they can have it today. Now, our language doesn't prohibit them from going down that road.
No.
But there is one proviso. They can't do it at the expense of quality public schools and quality public education. They can do it, but not at the expense of. And that's pretty important.
Comment from Christina Laster, one of our freedom fighters around the country here. Those who are concerned about the possible tort claims are those who are not planning to educate children, right? And I agree with you, Christina. And I think that we have seen that our state is not educating our children how it should be, right? And one of the things that frustrates me with what the teachers unions come out and try to do, and parents in Minnesota, parents around the country, you've probably seen your unions do this. They want to distract, deflect, and keep us from thinking about the disparities, the problems that exist, right? So if they can get folks thinking, oh, well, this is going to privatize. I mean, when those are just tired, right? I mean, everything we're talking about, if it is, and there's a ton of solutions that are out there, right? Education Minnesota's stance is no. And it didn't take them long to say no, right? They came out right away, said no. They started talking about all of the things this could lead to, or what we were trying to do with the Page Amendment. And I want to go back to something that, we were talking about at the top of the show, right? The foundation, the Page Amendment as the catalyst to change, right? That's what the Page Amendment is about, you all. Like, families, we still have to step up and think about the other solutions that are going to close that gap, right? The Page Amendment gets us a sturdy foundation. It allows parents and organizations that are working on education issues to come present those solutions, go through the process, and hopefully change education. Am I wrong when I say you all aren't being prescriptive here, right? And I've heard you say this, but you aren't saying, hey, these are the solutions that we should be focused on.
That's exactly right. That was by design, because Alan and I are quick to point out that neither of us are educators.
Right.
We want to tell you, or tell the schools, or tell the parents, this is what your class size should be. This is what your curriculum should be. Let the parents and the teachers and the administrators work together to determine that. And we just think that we want to make education the highest priority of the state, and we want every child to have a civil right to a quality education. And then that's the catalyst for the parents and the teachers to come together to design the system that works for their kids. We don't think it should be one size fits all. Like, kids in Mankato may need different supports, may need different tools than kids in North Minneapolis or kids in Wayzata. Let the parents and the teachers determine what their children need. So it's not one size fits all. Right now we have a uniform system of adequate. That's what the Constitution calls for. Mm-hmm. When I think of a uniform system of adequate, I literally think of McDonald's. You go to any McDonald's in the country and you're going to get the same cheeseburger. You can, it'll fill your stomach up. It's not the healthiest meal that you're going to have.
Nasty.
Okay, well, I won't say nasty, because you know what? I go to McDonald's from now and again. But I think we should aspire for better for our children.
Justice Page?
I mean, Neel says it well.
And it's one of those things, right? I mean, I know politics, right? I understand the political theater, but it just pisses me off, because it's like, the constitutional amendment is clear. The Page Amendment is clear. We had Representative Rena Moran, one of the lead authors on the Page Amendment. We had her on the show a few weeks ago. And I will say that the fire that Representative Moran has, and some folks on the Posse Caucus, it's burning strong, right? I mean, they understand the need to do something, and do something right now. Where I get concerned, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this, obviously, but where I get concerned is that Minnesota, we have this thing called Minnesota nice, right? So folks will talk really nice about things. They'll be very passive aggressive, if you will, at some times. But when it comes to actual change, a lot of folks think Minnesota is the place where ideas go to die. Do y'all think Minnesotans are ready for the type of change, the solid foundation that the Page Amendment will bring to the state of Minnesota? Justice Page, let's start with you.
I think Minnesotans are absolutely ready. They just want the opportunity to weigh in. And that's what our effort is all about, trying to get the legislature to put it on the ballot so that the people of this state can weigh in. Given that opportunity, we think they will support our proposed amendment overwhelmingly.
I agree.
I agree with what Alan just said, but I also wonder, after George Floyd's killing, his murder, I think we're at a gut check moment, which is, are we as a state really serious about addressing these terrible disparities that we have in our society? I hope we are, and I agree with Alan that if this gets on the ballot, the people in Minnesota will overwhelmingly support it because they do care about education. But more broadly, are we serious about really addressing these disparities? I hope we are in the state. This Page Amendment could be a way of beginning to close those disparities, a powerful way to begin to close those disparities. But I also am realistic. I remember that Rodney King was beaten almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
The whole nation focused on that, and then nothing.
Here we are.
We can't allow that to happen here.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, this is the Dark Side of Education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. We've got Neel Kashkari from the Federal Reserve Bank, Justice Alan Page joining us this morning. We're talking Page Amendment. And on the Dark Side of Education, I mean, we talk about the dark side of education, but we also dive into solutions. And going back to Education Minnesota for a second, I see a comment here or question from Aaliyah Hodge. What's up, Aaliyah? Good morning. If admin doesn't like this language, what are they proposing as an alternative? More of the same? Has Education Minnesota proposed anything? Have they come to the table? I'm not aware of it, but maybe you guys know about it.
We met with Education Minnesota early on in this process. We sat down with them, thought we had a good conversation. They suggested that they were interested, that they would likely be coming back to us with maybe some way to improve the language. And by the way, we're not opposed to improving the language, making it better, making it stronger. We're not at all opposed to that. And eventually they came back to us and said, no, we're not interested in proposing any language. Indeed, we're not going to support your proposed amendment. We're going to fight it. I was stunned, quite frankly, and I'm not easily stunned. And I was very surprised and disappointed that they didn't come back with, we don't like this, so how do we add something or change something to make it better? They had evidently want nothing to do with that, at least at this point.
They just said no, right? So I mean, for folks watching, tuning in, it's like we go through this process, and I want Justice Page and President Kashkari to share what they've been doing to get the information out there. But we go through this process of trying to do what's best for our children. And folks have heard me talk about the union several times. Folks are asking, what can we do? One of the things that we're doing at Minnesota Parent Union is starting to collaborate with a lot more teachers and educators who feel like the barriers that the unions present should not be there. And they're stepping up, using their voices, not only on the Page Amendment, but the idea of parent power, family power, right? What have you guys been doing to get the message out there, make sure people know what the Page Amendment is about? Are you just talking to, corporate America, or what have you been doing to get out into the communities?
Well, up until COVID hit, Alan and I were doing dozens and dozens of meetings with community groups, with legislators, with anybody who would ask to see us. Unfortunately, we had to press pause because of the pandemic. We all were sheltering in place. Now we're re-engaging through forums like this. We have to, still respect the fact that COVID is still out there. So we're doing a lot of things online, both with community groups, with teacher groups, with superintendents, anybody who will listen, because ultimately the people of Minnesota have to demand this. If the people of Minnesota demand this, their elected leaders are going to have to listen. And so we're doing everything we can to get out and make sure that people are aware of this. And then obviously, Rashad, as you know, there's an independent group that you're part of that is formed to really do this more formally.
And I don't have anything to add to what Neel said there, but I would just note, this is not about being anti-union. This is not about, my background is in the labor movement.
Yes, sir.
I started as a players representative when we were building the National Football League Players Association. I was on the union's executive committee. And so I know full well the importance and the value of the work that labor organizations do. But it just seems to me that you can't, your response to the crisis, and it is a crisis, and your response to the failure to educate children can't simply be no.
Agree.
And by the way, just to build on that for a second, when Attorney General Ellison came, when we did the announcement of this proposal at the Minneapolis Fed, Attorney General Ellison was our keynote speaker. And he literally said to Education Minnesota, you don't get to just say no. You can say, yes, if you make the following changes, yes, but here's what we're for. But you don't get to just say no, because if you just say no, then you are endorsing the status quo, which are terrible outcomes for so many Minnesota kids, and that's simply unacceptable. And I thought it was brilliant the way he put it.
Yes.
And it's like, I want to point out something to folks, right? When you think about the Page Amendment, right? And there's a ton of folks, Our Children Minnesota, which I'm a founding board member of Our Children, Minnesota Parent Union, Ed Allies, Great Minnesota, ton of folks who are working on the Page Amendment. And, Justice Page just said, he's a union guy, right? Nothing about the Page Amendment is targeted at the union, right? You would think that it is based on their response, or I would think that it is based on their response. But the bipartisan coalition, right? The different thinkers who have been a part of this. And the one thing that, I want to point out in this effort, and I talked about earlier, there's been tons of efforts to close the gap. I mean, there's $600 million a year that the state puts out to close the gap. Nothing is working. I would say that we are in a state of educational chaos. When you think of how distance learning went last spring, how distance learning is going for a lot of families right now, in my mind, that's that uniform and adequate, right? Schools are having to be uniform and adequate, which based on, some of the feedback I'm getting from school leaders and principals has them stuck right now. So when we think about the benefits of the Page Amendment, right? Yes, it shifts from the system to our children. But I would say that it also gives schools the opportunity to get better. And there are schools who are doing a great job of serving all children. But we know there are a lot of schools who are not. We know that we have worst in nation education gaps. One of the questions that I've seen somewhere in the comments is what can people do, right? And I'll sort of address this a little bit here. There's going to be obviously more conversation on the Page Amendment, but one of the things that we're doing, Minnesota Parent Union, Our Children, and others, is we're building up this coalition. Right? Call it a coalition for justice, a coalition for the Page Amendment that is super grassroots. Right? I say to folks all the time, if you come with the great idea, but you do it, you implement it in the same way that it's always been done, our gaps continue to widen, right? Things don't change. And what I mean by that is forgetting about families. A lot of initiatives in Minnesota, they start them up, and if there are families there, it's usually your wealthy white families, usually not families of color. usually not low-income white families. What would the two of you say the importance of families being at the center? I mean, children are obviously at the center of the Page Amendment. What's the importance of families being at the center, the importance of this being a grassroots effort in your eyes? Let's start with you, President Kashkari.
I think the only way this gets done is if this is from the bottom up, the people across the state saying, our children deserve this. All the children in Minnesota deserve this. And, you reminded me just now, Rashad, of one of the pushbacks that we've received is, only wealthy families will be able to access the legal system to take advantage of that. And maybe Justice Page could speak to that from his experience on the court.
Well, the reality is that if you look at our history, that's just not the case. One of the first cases I sat on when I joined the court in 1993 was an education funding case brought by poor families. There's a case going on presently brought by poor families. So it's not just going to be wealthy families that access the opportunity to the extent that litigation is necessary. That won't be just something that will be beneficial to the wealthy. The other piece to that is that even if it happens to be a wealthy family that brings it, the benefits of any lawsuit accrue to everybody.
Yeah.
To everybody. And you ask why it's important for families to be involved. First of all, because it's the children of families that are being impacted.
Yes.
And we sometimes think that we don't have any power. When we work together, when we show up, when the legislature hears from us, we do have power, and they will listen. And if we show up at the ballot box and they don't listen to us, we have the power to change who is there, to put somebody in who will listen. We sometimes get a little cynical and think that, the system is rigged against us. It may be, but we have some ability to control that. And I think we have to start exercising that power. One other thing before I forget. What we're trying to do is not only not anti-union, it's certainly not anti-teacher. I spend a lot of time in schools and classrooms across the state. Indeed, over the years, I've across the country, talking with kids and teachers. And my experience is that the teachers I talk to are looking for something that will help them eliminate these gaps in performance.
Yeah.
They're struggling just like we are. And this amendment not only empowers children and families, I think it empowers teachers.
Agree.
And educators.
And one of the things that was just said over these past couple of minutes, and I think you said it, Justice Page, or it might have been you, Neel, but the power of families when we're organized, when we're showing up, right? One of the things recently is this boycott of Minneapolis public schools. And I won't get too far into that to get us into the weeds. But one of the things we've been seeing from more and more families is they are pulling their children out of Minneapolis public schools. And instead of putting them into a charter or a different district or a private school, they're homeschooling their children. Would this impact a family's ability to be able to homeschool and do school how they see fit for their children?
Not at all. Families get to choose. how their children get educated.
You have the right to free speech. It's not an obligation that you have to speak.
I
Right.
connected it to the organizing piece because I remember, back when things were, before COVID, we had a big group of homeschool families that showed up, and I don't know who put the cables on them or gave them the wrong information, but the organizing point is that they got organized, that they showed up, and I wouldn't say put a wrench in things, but sort of caused a moment for pause, right?
They
it
they
was
show
the best course.
they exercised their power
Exactly.
and got results.
Even if the argument they were making was unfounded,
Yeah.
the fact that they were organized and vocal, they accomplished what basically what happened is some people are opposed to this for the reasons that we talked about. And then they said, well, let's stir up this hornet's nest over here that's actually unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
But if it makes enough noise, it'll cause a distraction. And that was very effective in the moment.
And I just think about how effective we are going to be as families impacted by the disparities, as we continue to get organized, as we continue to make sure we have the information, right? And I brought up the homeschool families because I've talked to some of them, and they understood that, like, hey, okay, well, we weren't looking at it like that, right? We got scared that might happen. That's what we heard, but I think they're in a better place today. But as we think about getting the Page Amendment on the ballot, getting it through the legislature, it's going to take families impacted by the disparities to continue to step up, to continue to get organized. And I will, we'll talk about that as we move forward, the different pathways to get connected. But it starts with information, right?
Right.
We've got about 8 minutes left. I want to just sort of, any final thoughts in regards to the Page Amendment, in regards to the current state of education in Minnesota? President Kashkari, I'll start with you. Neel, my bad.
Thank you. It's okay, Rashad. I just keep going back to what are we doing? Let's go remind ourselves big picture. We want to create a civil right for every child in Minnesota to get a quality public education and make this the highest priority of the state. Who can be against that? And that's what I just keep coming back to. And we think, Alan and I challenged each other when we started working together. What could we do so that 20 years from now, we're not having the same conversation? And we think the Page Amendment is that catalyst to drive transformational change over time. Think about big civil rights. Think about Brown versus Board of Education. It didn't solve everything in America. It didn't end racial disparities in America, but it was a moment that began changing the trajectory of our country for the better. And that's what a big deal this is, and why we're both so committed to it.
That catalyst, we need it. Justice Page.
I started down this road of focusing on the importance and value of education more than 50 years ago. And things have gotten worse, not better. And if we are going to change the trajectory of our community in terms of opportunity, in terms of health, in terms of employment, in terms of social justice and criminal justice, we have to fix this problem. And it's frustrating to me because the problem is clear, and what we need to do to change to solve the problem is also clear. Yet we, for whatever reason, don't seem to have either desire or the will to do that. And it's time that those of us who are impacted You talk about families because it's our children.
Yes.
It's time for us to stand up and say, we've had enough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, again,
And when we do that, we can get the results that we're looking for.
and we have to do it, right?
But it won't happen magically. It won't happen. We can't will it to happen or wish it to happen, but we can stand up and make it happen.
Have to. Before I let y'all get out of here, right? I'm a Packers fan, Justice Page. Neel, I don't know who your favorite team is.
It's the worst. I'm a lifelong Cleveland Browns fan. You know, it's like it's a burden I'm carrying for a long time.
They got a few good players there, but
they always have a few good players.
Huh?
They always have a few good players.
Yeah, you got to put it together though. Justice Page, I assume your favorite team, even though folks might not call them the Purple People Eaters anymore, I assume your favorite team is the Vikings. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
All right. My question is, we've got 0-3 Minnesota Vikings at the 0-3 Houston Texans. Who's going to win this game, guys?
You know, I stopped predicting a long time ago. I gave up the prediction business when I had some control over who would win and who would lose.
Yeah.
And I couldn't guarantee anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the president of the Minneapolis Fed, and I represent this region, so I'm going to go for the Vikings.
Let's go Vikes, right? Go Vikes.
I'm rooting for the Vikings, but I learned a long time ago you can't guarantee anything in that business.
Hey, I feel you. Again, I appreciate y'all taking the time this Sunday morning. I'm going to try to make my tea time this afternoon. I think it's warming up a little bit. I ought to go wake my daughter up. She thinks she can stay up till 1 a.m. and sleep till 1 p.m. So I'm going to let y'all get out of here. We're going to keep working together, obviously. Again, thanks for coming on. Y'all have a good Sunday. Audience, stay tuned in. I'm going to talk about a couple of things to tee us up for next week. But again, thanks to President Kashkari, Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, and retired Supreme Court Justice Alan Page for joining us today, right? So you got lots of information on the Page Amendment. And I said at the top of the show, we have to get the information, y'all. Right? If we don't have the information, we can continue to be tricked by the system, right? And I actually do have to go wake Shia up here, so I do have to go. But next week, it's election season, y'all. And we need to know what's up with some of the school board candidates, some of our state representative candidates, Senate candidates. So we're going to sort of shift into diving in on some politics. No endorsements coming from me, but you'll clearly be able to see who I think is best for our children. So we'll try to get some Mpls, Minneapolis Public School Board candidates. We'll also have some St. Paul Public School Board candidates. Stay tuned for that. It'll be next Sunday, 10 a.m. As usual, y'all, quality is a must. Failure is not an option. I appreciate y'all tuning in today. I'm going to go put something in my hair, moisturize it a little bit, wake my daughter up. Have a good Sunday. Love y'all. God's peace and blessings, everyone.